Okay, you know what? We will honor the time for those of you who did jump on right at 3. So thank you for that. We'll get started. And Anna, if you could continue to let folks in. So thank you for joining us for Land Back and Liberation, Building Transnational Solidarity. My name is Lena Sharma Seth, and I am the founder of Mending the Chasm, and really honored that the panelists today said yes to this really important conversation for the time that we are in right now. And really, this is a part of my commitment to Dalit History Month, and also my ongoing curiosity and passion around what are the opportunities for solidarity, especially cross movement and across difference. So we begin with a land acknowledgement, and I am joining you from what is colonially known as Burlington, Ontario. And so I will speak to that location. And so Canada exists as we know it today because of the harmful impacts of colonization. While we work to disrupt colonial and oppression-rooted practices in the work that we feel called to do here at Mending the Chasm, we also acknowledge our presence as uninvited settlers on Brant Tract Treaty Territory, which are the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and home to many other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. With humility and respect, we express our deep gratitude to the original peoples of Turtle Island, who continue to fulfill their responsibilities as guardians and stewards of these lands, waters, plant life, animal life, and all of the beautiful elements of creation that exist. We also acknowledge the harm of colonization that resilient people of the global diaspora have experienced, including Black, racialized, and Dalit communities who have experienced displacement, land theft, enslavement, violence, genocide, and cultural appropriation. We continue to learn about and honor our responsibilities with humility as we work in solidarity with fellow community members to heal from the harm of colonization and to reclaim the joy, the inclusion, the well-being, and liberation that is every human's birthright. And I like to shamelessly plug this resource that probably many of you are familiar with. It's native-land.ca. It's an Indigenous created resource, and it's also, they're based in Canada. And so really their intention is that anywhere you go in the world, you should be able to add your city or your postal code and learn about the Indigenous communities, the languages, and the treaties of that area. And so shameless plug for their fabulous work. So um, and so this is the flow of our conversation today. And so we're moving through some of it already. Again, I really want to take as little time as possible and really give the mic to the speakers we have today. But this is just, for your purposes, some of the flow. And so what I'd like to do first is introduce the panel speakers. And so the first, I know we shared the bios when you first registered, but I'll just take a moment to introduce everyone. So first I'd like to introduce Patty Krawec. Patty is an Anishinaabe Ukrainian writer and speaker from Lakso First Nation. She served on the board of the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center for 8 years and is a member of the Strong Water Singers. She's the co-host of the Medicine for the Resistance podcast and co-founder of Nikanaganan, a foundation which collects funds and disperses them to Indigenous people and organizations. Her work has been published in Sojourners and Canadian Living, as well as Rampant Magazine and Midnight Sun, and she posts podcasts and essays with some regularity on her Substack, pattykrawec.substack.com, and she's the author of Becoming Kin, an Indigenous call to unforgetting the past and reimagining our future. And she's currently working on her next book. And she also sews skirts on the fly, as we just learned at the opening of this. So welcome, Patty, and thank you again for saying yes to this conversation. So the next person I'd like to introduce is Gennile Thomas. So Gennile is a transformational leader, activist, athlete, and mother with a background in community organizing, labor studies, and creative and visual merchandising. Raised in the Halton region, Gennile recognized a need for wellness and educational programs to develop critical resources for marginalized groups in her community. And fueled by her passion for equity and social justice, Gennile founded Halton Black Voices in 2020. in an effort to develop policies and programs to address these significant needs in the Halton community. In her work, she aims to work inclusively with residents, business groups, and a range of community partners to develop anti-racist programs for corporate and community groups. Gennile looks forward to deepening her connections with members of the Indigenous and 2S LGBTQIA+ communities in all of her work. So welcome, Gennile, and again, an honor to have you here. So our next speaker that I'd like to introduce is Chantelle Paiu. So Chantelle is Palestinian Canadian and a vocal activist for social justice. She is previous chair of the Ontario Palestinian Rights Association and continues her dedicated work in local Palestinian advocacy within her new community in New Brunswick. With a career in the nonprofit sector focused on environmental and food security issues, Chantelle is passionate about engaging youth, fostering curiosity, and tuning into compassion. She co-founded the Conscious Birth Collective, providing support for women during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, while also organizing events for women at all stages of life. Now a new mother, Chantelle finds joy in her family life while remaining committed to creating positive change in her community and beyond. So welcome, Chantelle, as well. I'm glad to have you here. And so our the final panelist I'd like to introduce is Dr. Chinaya Jungam. Dr. Chinaya Jungam is an associate professor in the Department of History at Carleton University. He holds an MA in history from the University of Hyderabad, an Master's in Philosophy and Modern Indian History from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. He was awarded the Felix Fellowship and Harry Frank Guggenheim Dissertation Fellowship for doctoral studies. Dr. Jungam was a postdoctoral fellow at the International Center for Advanced Studies, New York University from 2005 to 2006, and his research focus is on the social and intellectual history of Dalits in modern South Asia. His first book, Dalits and the Making of Modern India, was published by the Oxford University Press in 2017. In his book, Dr. Jungam presents Dalit perspectives on nationalism and argues that Dalits were equal participants in the imagination and the politics of the formation of independent India. Dalits argued for the abolition of untouchability and the ending of caste inequality with its accompanying humiliations as preconditions for independence. Dalits imagined a nation founded on principles of justice, liberty, equality, and human dignity, and these eventually became the foundational principles of the Indian Constitution, drafted under the guidance of B.R. Ambedkar, a Dalit himself. So these brief bios don't do a justice to the full gifts that today's panelists bring, but really give you a sense of who they are. So welcome all. Just moving through some of the commitments we have around making sure we're sharing well and participating well in this space. And so I just want to share a couple of community agreements that I invite all of us to engage in this dialogue in this session with. And so I invite that we listen with curiosity and compassion. So you may be tuning in and you may hear ideas that maybe challenge some of the narratives and stories you have, and just bringing an openness that can we live with the tension of that. We invite double confidentiality. So no stories offered here are meant to be shared outside of the space, and also no stories shared in this space are invitations. In case you hear a fellow participant sharing a story, they may not want to talk about it outside the space. So really just honoring the safety of we're trying to create in this container. May we remember that our impact is more important than our intentions. And so may we move with good intentions and remain committed to repairing any harm we may unintentionally cause. So that can look like maybe a question is asked that really may not have an intention of harm, but can cause harm. And so we will be reviewing the questions that we put forward during the Q&A for participants to ask questions to make sure that we're grounded in inquiry that is not causing harm. We avoid making assumptions about other people, including assumptions about history, race, or lived experience. We center lived experience in equity, inclusion, and anti-racism work because we recognize its valuable insight and wisdom. And we are committed to removing participants from the space if postures, comments, and participation is harmful to the speakers or fellow participants. So hopefully we won't have to exercise that last one, but we are striving to create a safe enough container. And so appreciate your participation with these agreements in mind. And if you have any agreements you'd like to see guide our conversation, please feel free to share them in the chat. And also feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat to share, maybe where you're from, your pronouns, if that feels accessible, and also maybe the land you're joining from. So that would be wonderful to hear. And maybe, and I don't know if you want to share the tech housekeeping or if you'd like me to review these. Yeah, okay. So just if you haven't renamed yourself, I invite you to rename yourself on Zoom. And so you'd click on those three dots when you hover your mouse over your square. You'll see those three dots. If you could click on that and take the rename option and add your name, it helps us to know who we're engaging with here. And just mute your microphone when you're not actively speaking. And that reminder that we are recording this event. And just, yep. And if you have a question, please feel free to offer it in the chat. Anna will be, or you could send it directly to Anna. She will be fielding the questions that we will be taking from the audience for panelists. And if you have a specific panelist in mind that you would like to answer that question, you can also specifically indicate that as well. And closed captioning should be accessible in this moment. I believe we have activated it, and so I think in your kind of the bar at the bottom of Zoom, you should be in a position to click on that, and you'll start to see those if you need them. Okay, so we're not saying thank you yet. So I will stop by sharing all of the important housekeeping has been done. And so let me stop my share. And with that, so what's going to happen in the first 30 to 40 minutes is we're going to hold space to hear from each of our speakers. And so with that, what I'd like to do is invite Patty forward to open our panel. The presentation, I should say. We'll move to the panel once everybody's presented. So handing the baton over to you, Patty.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was delighted to have the time available. This has been kind of a bonkers spring for me, along with, kind of my own commitments. There's also organizing around Free Palestine, happening in Niagara that I'm, kind of tangentially involved with. I've been privileged to speak at a few of the rallies. One of the things that the organizers down here are very committed to is developing relationship with the local Indigenous community, which I have really appreciated. It's not something that we see a lot of, in organizing spaces that are around, around this area. So it is kind of nice and really highlights the parallels between, the way colonization lands and acts, around the world. So as we're thinking about land back and, reconciliation, it's reconciliation time in Canada. Everybody wants to reconcile. So I just wanted to open with a quote from Decolonization is Not a Metaphor that Clee Benally cites in his book, No Spiritual Surrender. Excuse me. So Tuck and Wang write, reconciliation is concerned with questions of what will decolonization look like? What will happen after abolition? What will be the consequences of decolonization for the settler? And as a sidebar, I can confirm that these are the questions I get most often when I talk. Continues, incommensurability, so the fact that, two things can't work together, acknowledges that these questions need not and perhaps cannot be answered in order for decolonization to exist as a framework. We want to say that decolonization is not obliged to answer these questions. Decolonization is not accountable to settlers or settler futurity. Decolonization is accountable to Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous futurity. And so when I think about land back, and I think about land back in the context of the global fight for land back, for free Palestine, for free the land back is not a change in ownership. It's not a matter of land trusts and giving land back to reserves, although those things can be good short-term goals. We're actually talking about a different relationship to the land, that the land itself would be free, that the land, the land here in Niagara would be free, that the land across Turtle Island would be free, that the land in Palestine, what is currently known as India, throughout Africa, all these places, that the land itself would be free from the impacts of colonization, from the impacts of private ownership. Like I said, it's not a matter of a change in ownership. It's a matter of no more ownership, of a completely different way of conceptualizing our relationship with each other. And even as I say completely different, it's really not that different. All of our histories contain stories about the way that we used to live. The modern nation state is just a modern invention. We didn't always live that way. And one of the things that I really like about that nativeland.ca map is that it has overlapping layers. It doesn't have fixed boundaries as if the Anishinaabes, stop here and the Lakota start there. These were always layered relationships in which we lived together. And that requires a much different politic and a much different way of belonging, to place and to each other, because now we're not talking about purity and citizenship. Now we're talking about relationship. And the more you live in those layered spaces, the further you kind of get from the center of Anishinaabe Aki, Anishinaabe land, and you get more and more into those layered spaces, that requires a way of living with other people, a way of living with, with people who may have other belief systems, other priorities, other ways of organizing families and other forms of governance, but finding a way to live together. And I just found this book when I was in, it was given to me when I was in California, Transcommunality. And it was written 20 years ago, and yet it is so very timely because that's exactly what he's talking about. The author is an Afro-Indigenous man. He's a sociologist in the US, and he's talking about this building of relationships between autonomous communities, which for me, when I think about land back, and a lot of the people that I talk to, people that I have read as far, back to Vine Deloria and others, that's the kind of thing that they're looking for. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about, is a return to those kinds of layered relationships where autonomous communities can join together without the need to convert each other to our way of thinking, so long as we're able to work cooperatively and collaboratively. And for me, that's really important, because I keep coming back. So I'm sure we've all seen those memes about how Indigenous people should have had better homeland security. And my friend Daniel Heath Justice, he's no longer on Twitter, but he was at the time. And he posted something about, he understands the humor of these memes and kind of the sentiment that's behind it. But he also points out that these memes make the problem, put the problem on us, that as Indigenous people, we should have had better homeland security. We should have protected our borders better. And really, he says that the generosity of our ancestors was never the problem. The generosity of our ancestors was who they are, and it was their greatest strength. And so for us as Indigenous peoples here today in Niagara, it is important for us to mobilize that generosity, to not operate from a scarcity mindset, because really we exist on the land that knew our ancestors. And for me, that is a profound privilege. That is a profound gift that we still have, and a relationship that we can then invite other people into forming those relationships, into forming that rootedness. On my maternal side, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, they've never had the opportunity to go back home to the land that knew their ancestors, which I was able to do and go back home. I can go back home anytime I want, anytime I want to make that 24-hour drive to Lac Seul First Nation. I can go back to those lands. The water that flows past where I live now here in Niagara comes from that water up there. And I don't know what stories it carries that I don't yet have the skill to listen to, but it still connects me. And that to me is so deeply important. And so I wasn't even paying attention to how much time I have. So I'm just going to wrap up with these two thoughts. As newcomers to this place, you find rootedness in two ways. So one, I would say to look for the medicine that shows up for you. Because the oceans that surround these continents also connect to the lands that knew your ancestors in all kinds of ways. And they carry those stories to this place. And so the land of this place knows what medicine to offer you. So pay attention to that. Pay attention to the plants and the animals that persistently show up for you. And then learn from those plants and animals, and that will help you find rootedness in this place. And then the second piece is within our organizing. Within our organizing towards justice and towards, a better world, we have to be very mindful that what we are doing is not just creating a kinder and more inclusive settler colonialism, that we are organizing on Indigenous land, on stolen land, that is governed not by the people who are of this place. And so ask yourself in your organizing 2 questions. Do you have the consent of the land for the work that you're doing? And do you have the consent of the people of that land for the work that you are doing? Because however just your cause is, it needs to be rooted in the reality that you're organizing on stolen land. And so if you don't have those things, what is your plan for how you're going to build those relationships? How are you going to develop that kin? And as I said, the Palestinian organizing that's happening down here is very invested in developing relationship, with the local Indigenous community, very aware that our struggles are materially connected. And I would say that as well, with anti-Black racism, with the experience of the Dalit people and others who are experiencing oppression, our struggles are not just similar, they are materially connected. And the theme of everything I talk about is about surviving together, because these transcommunal, these transnational solidarities are so critically important. And I really appreciate Lena's work in getting, in getting these conversations going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. I was like furiously taking notes because I wanted to be able to just make sure I can lean on questions that come as I hear you, and just really, really appreciating. I've always appreciated your lens since the time we met, and I really actually met you through your book first, your first book, and just that reminder of how indelibly we all are connected and how much power. I mean, not that we're doing this for power, but how much power lives in bringing kind of the solidarity around our struggles and working together. So I continue to appreciate that, and thank you for what you offered. Okay, and so with that, I will invite, I'm just going back to my order. I'm like, who did I say would go next? The next kind of speaker I would like to invite forward is Gennile. If I can, Dr. Jungam, I'm sorry, I was very familiar with you, but if you could come next, that would be wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
Anna, and Anna, you may have to share your screen, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Lena, and also Patty and all the participants, and also panelists. And I would like to extend my Jai Bhim and also the Happy Dalit History Month to you all. And it is such a pleasure to be part of this conversation. Especially, we are living in a very critical times, both in the context of India and also in the context of the global politics, where the war in Gaza and how the millions of children are being, and thousands of children are being killed. And in that context, I think, this what we are doing today is a very important reminder about our responsibility as fellow human beings. So in this context, on behalf of Southern and also on behalf of Dalits across the world, I would like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. And so both as an academic and also an activist, I feel that being a Dalit, it's my responsibility to speak for my people and also bring their voice into the global conversations. And mine is a small effort, and I hope you will extend your support to our voice. Next, please. Next slide. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So in this context, because the theme is about land back and the way in which the global oppressive regimes, particularly in the context of making up the modern world, and the way in which European colonial regimes set on this whole idea of, at one level, beginning it was about discovery and trade, then it extended into, stealing lands. The land stealing is very central to the idea of colonization project. Like in places like India, they might not have directly stolen the lands, but what they did is that, they aided in stealing the lands of the indigenous people, and also dispossessing the, oppressed caste was central to the idea of colonial project. So in this context, the Brahmanism and colonialism work together in setting up this very interesting oppressive structures which helped the European colonialism to succeed and also extend its tentacles across the world. And in this context, what I see is that, caste as an institution, as a very important social organization, but also embedded into multiple spheres of life, both from political to economic, and it had a global ramifications. And because what I see is that, because caste precedes race, and caste also has more than 2000 years history. And what you see is that, caste has a very efficient way of working in terms of exploitation, surplus extraction, and also making people work freely, unfree, providing unfree and unpaid labor for the, privileged people. So in this context, what you see that in 15th century, when Europeans have come to Indian subcontinent, they were able to see the efficiency of the system. So therefore, what you see is that, in the development of racism and also indigenous racism and other forms of racism across the world, what you see is that caste acts as a very important template. So in this context, what you see is that, this whole idea of othering is very, very central to the idea of making up the modern world. So in this context, what you see, the European civilization, in fact, recently, Benjamin Netanyahu, when the old protests are happening across the world, demanding end to the war and the ceasefire, one of the catchphrases used in justification of killing of Palestinians is this idea of saving the Western civilization. So this whole idea that, the modern civilization, which is being equated to, Western civilization, which founded on the basis of colonial exploitation, what it does is that, it dehumanizes people who are not white, not Christians, and also steals their lands and also resources. So in this context, what happens is that in this process, stealing dignity of human being is central to this project of colonialism. So therefore, when we speak about, decolonization and also anti-colonialism, one of the important ways in which we have to do is reclaiming our humanity of people who are facing these regimes, not only in the colonial times, also in the present times. Next slide, please. Yes. So if you want to understand what caste system is, like if you're not familiar with caste system, and why is it that, Dalit predicament is very central to the idea of building, global solidarities, and the role of, Indian diaspora, particularly in places like Canada, who come from the very privileged backgrounds, and how they basically, place themselves in the context of multicultural society like Canada. We have to understand how caste affects basically as a systems of oppression. What you see is that, the fundamental difference between caste oppressed people and caste privileged. Like for example, a person like me who come from caste oppressed background, like as a first generation educated person, one of the important aspect challenges is that, the very idea of accessing schools is a very important challenge we face. And because we are also very poor people, we don't have lands, we don't have resources. And another important thing is that, like the very idea of access to education is predicated on, denied because, because of our social location. So in this context, what we see is that, like our social location as exploited people and also as former untouchables, one of the important thing is that, we don't have any social or cultural capital to, rely on. So in this context, if you see a Dalit in Canada, like, if you come across person like me or Vijay, who is one of the founders of Southern, what we see is that, we don't have same sort of cultural or social capital like any other person. So in this context, what happens is that, even within India and outside, when we were coming out, one of the important thing is that, the system always talked against us. And in this context, what happens is that, it always defines who we are and our existence. So therefore, we have to make double efforts just to feel ourselves equal to everyone else. The second slide, please. So in this context, if you come across a person coming from privileged caste background, the difference, like this is what you have to understand, particularly in the context of places like India. The privileged caste people are not fleeing India because of persecution or any sort of negative issues in India. For them, migration to first world, like places like Canada and America and Western Europe, is part of their caste privilege. For them, it's a privilege, and where in which they're trying to seek different prospects for their life. And also in this context, for them, when they're landing in Canada or America or Western Europe, one of the important things, they are coming up with this very important background where they had generations of education, and in which basically what you see is that, like I just got this picture today from this Hyderabad private school, where in which, this privileged kids, the kind of, it is like any other first world school. You cannot, make much. Like previous slides, you see that, the first generation Adivasi Dalit children, the kind of schools they attend is very different from the kind of schools privileged people attend. And mostly they go to international schools. And in fact, previously it used to be Catholic schools. So in this context, what happens is that the very starting point for them is in such a way that, it's a very privileged situation. So in this context, what happens is that the school and cultural environments provides them needed social and cultural capital. So in this context, what you see that, when you see the life of a caste oppressed person in Canada and caste privileged person in Canada, what you see that, they are very differently defined in their existence. So with this, what you see is that, when you encounter Indian origin person or South Asian origin person, you see a very important difference, particularly in their social and also political location. Next slide, please. So with this, what you see that, the context in which what we are seeing, like particularly the problem with Indian diaspora, but the way in which the Hindu right politics and the way in which Hindu fascism growing in India, one of the important things is that, it has placed itself very well in Canada and North America. And with this, what you see that, like what you see, the Indian culture, the way it is being promoted in North America, is that, like it's based on this whole idea that, denial of caste and caste-based oppression, and also this representation that all Indians are vegetarians, and also all Hindus are vegetarians, and also they are, this whole idea of love for cow and hugging cows, and also non-violence, because of, again, very important seminal figure in history, Gandhi, propagated non-violence. And but actually the foundations of caste system is basically based on inequality and oppression. And also the celebration of Diwali, for example, even in Canadian Parliament they do that. Like what you see, these are all representations of oppressive systems which actually alienates people like me and the caste oppressed people. Like next slide, please. So in this context, what we see is that, as privileged people living in Canada, we feel that, what is happening in places like India or in other places, and even in Palestine, we feel ourselves not being affected or insulated. So what we have to realize is that, we have to realize that what we eat, wear, and enjoy every day, they come at the cost of oppression, dehumanization, and exploitation. Like you might know about sweatshops, and the other day I'm looking at shrimp we eat, from which comes from India and Bangladesh, how much exploitation it exists. And having awareness about these sort of, systems wherein which, our complicity, the ways consumers and also buyers of these goods is very, very important. And what we see is that, like across the world, one of the important thing, like Patty is saying, like, the way oceans are connected and the way in which, all the lands across the world are connected. One of the ways in which you see that, either Dalit or Indigenous person or Palestinian or any other indigenous communities, what you see that, dispossession of lands and denial of dignity is central to the idea of, keeping the oppressive regimes intact. So in this context, what you see is that, having global solidarity is one of the important thing is that, speaking about these, oppressions and also connecting with each other and forming alliances and, intersectionality is very central to the idea of, forming a global, community which speaks and advocates for justice and equality and dignity. And Jai Bhim, thank you so much and happy Dalit History Month.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jungam. I've really appreciated, I continue to appreciate every time I get to learn from you. And two things that are kind of sitting with me as I think about all that you shared in your piece, especially as a privileged body in the caste system who is working, to disrupt and really deepen my own awareness, that idea of that there really is no over there and over here. And I think that is something that I continually sit with. And the idea of reclaiming our humanity and how even these, when we participate in systems of oppression, how we are dehumanizing ourselves as well. It's not just the, who do you have to be or what happens to you when you participate in the dehumanization of someone else. And so just sitting with those two pieces and just thanking you again for your presentation. And so what I'd like to do now, you're welcome. What I'd like to do now is invite Chantelle, if you want to come forward and share your piece. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Of course, I just want to start off by saying thank you for having me in this space, and thank you for the speakers that are joining us today that I feel so humbled by in my quest of always learning and wanting to learn how to be a better ally. I feel that there are always things that we are missing as individuals when we are within the advocacy world, and listening to others is just the most important piece. So being in this space is really helpful to come back and really sit with what needs to be done. As it was mentioned in the chat, our collective oppression, like we need our collective liberation, right? Like it's something that comes all together. That was very powerful. So as mentioned, my name is Chantelle. I am a second generation Palestinian, and I want to just talk about my experience as a Palestinian Canadian, because I'm sure that with everything that has been happening over the past almost 7 months now, a perspective like mine isn't necessarily heard, and not many people know that Palestinians like me exist. So I'm a Palestinian Canadian. I hold Israeli citizenship, and I'm also Christian. And when it comes to these levels of oppression, and when it comes to these levels of discrimination, I know firsthand from visiting back home and from seeing what my family goes through, the levels of privilege within this occupation. And I think I wouldn't say that it's complex, but I would say that it's very important for people to understand when identifying with this concept of land back, because there are a lot of instances of ongoing discrimination and racism, even for us as Arabs, as Israeli Arabs, they call us. They don't call us Israeli Palestinians because they want to erase that we are Palestinians. So even coming from a place of privilege, of having an Israeli passport in order to travel and to go back and forth to see my family, it does come with a lot of stipulation. So how this all works out, my parents were born in occupied Palestine. This is not just Gaza and West Bank. This is the whole country of Palestine. When my grandparents were faced with the decision of whether or not they stay or leave their homes that they had been in their whole lives and generations before, of course, there was a lot unknown. They had heard of the thousands of Palestinians who had already been evacuated from their homes, who have already been refugees. They had heard of the Zionist militia groups who had come in and massacred villages and destroyed villages. And for us, for my grandparents at the time, it was either become a refugee and never return back to your home, or stay and live under an occupation that we didn't know how long it would be or what it would be like. So with that information, they stayed. They were issued Israeli passports, Israeli citizenship. They were granted the right to live and study and work throughout what was known as Israel, what is known as Israel. However, it was still under occupation. They were still considered not even second class, but third and fourth class citizens. You are living in a place where people essentially don't want you to exist. You are going to school in a place where you are learning the colonizers' mother tongue, and you are learning the history of the colonizers. You're working in places where you have to work 3 times as hard to even get a job. And even when you do get the job, you're working amongst people who also might not want you to exist. So there's, of course, so much privilege in being a Palestinian with access to our homeland, but it comes with such a price. And it also comes with the knowing that you are never truly in your home when you have someone else there waiting for you to leave. I want to emphasize this idea of land back, because I feel that some people may be intimidated by this or threatened when someone says, give the land back. And as Patty was saying, it's not the ownership of it, but for us to have access to our homeland, to return back to our homeland, to care for it. Because at the moment, those who are trying to gain control of it are burning it down. They are burning down olive trees. They are flooding our soil with salt water and making it uninhabitable for generations. The debris and the destruction from the war in the past 7 months has made Gaza uninhabitable. There is no way that people will be able to return and thrive there. So this concept of land back is not a threat of genocide to a population who has colonized and settled there, but is a call for this land to be free, to be taken as, to be, I don't even want to say taken back. It's not even to be taken back, but it's for us to return back to it so we can care for it. And whoever wants to stay there can stay there, but it will be without an occupation and without the levels of oppression that we are facing in this moment. As I mentioned with my family back home, they are able to vote for a government, but does that government represent them? No. If you've heard what their government is saying right now, they're all making genocidal slurs and saying horrible things about Palestinians. So given those rights to vote in a place where you don't even have representation, it's a false privilege. It's something where they're making it seem as if, oh, everyone there has equal rights. They can vote, they can work, they can play. But it's not true when you come down to experiencing the racism firsthand. I speak of this from my own experience, from visiting and seeing what is happening there and seeing the signs that simply say, unless you have served in the military, you are not able to work in these locations. And this modern day apartheid, this modern day racism is so rampant for even the most untrained eye to see. And I think I might be rambling at this point, but just coming back to these visions of being at home and feeling at home, that is the end goal here. And the solidarity across the Indigenous, the Black voices in our community, all of these communities that are stepping up and speaking up in solidarity, that is where the liberation will come from. Because these levels of oppression are affecting all of us and our ability to feel at home wherever we are displanted, wherever we have been put unwillingly or willingly. So all of this to say is that over these past 7 months, of course, there has been so much grief and there has been so much that has come up. But as I was mentioning to the speakers in one of our previous meetings, the silver lining in all of this is that we have come together and we have seen such solidarity across the movements, from environmentalists and feminists and Indigenous communities and Black communities and migrant workers, and all of these people who are facing these same levels of oppression are coming together, and that is where the power lies. So I don't want to say too much more. I'm excited for the questions to really explain how more people can get involved. But my final note to those who are working to be allies, who are standing beside us, make sure you are listening, because there are so many stories that have not been told, who have not been given a chance to speak. And unless you hear these stories, you will not truly understand the work that needs to be done. I have a different perspective, a rare perspective, given being a Palestinian Christian Israeli citizen. And I think that it really does take a lot of patience and understanding to listen and to understand where each person is coming from before we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chantelle. I appreciate just again making notes here and just thinking about the connections between all of the conversations so far. And one thing that I'm sitting with, a reminder, is that idea of that change always comes from the people, and not necessarily the systems. I tend to say that I'm not looking to the structures first, I look to the people first. And so again, so much overlap as well and connections between those who've spoken so far. But thank you so much, Chantelle. I'll invite our final presenter forward. So Gennile, if you could unmute yourself, and thank you.
Thank you guys for, organizing this space. I really appreciate it. To be able to talk about building solidarity across movements. It is vital. It's important in achieving the justice and equity, especially through a lens of, radical abolishment and radical leadership. I think we're at a time now, it's very pivotal. It's very important to notice that we are connecting our struggles and our shared goals. And it's been continuous, even for the past decade. It has only grown, and we are getting stronger together. And it's because our shared goals and our connected struggles have deepened and have broadened, across the colonial framework of these lands. So many movements are bounded in common goals. We see the common goals within our community for equity and for justice. So it is quite important to get the folks together. For instance, the struggle for racial justice and economic equality. You see the struggle today with our unhoused folks, and the lack of affordable housing. That is again a streamline of things that we try to organize for. Within the Black community, it is equity and justice through education and awareness, building that solidarity, building that collective power, is a way that we've connected outside of our off screen and outside of our circles. Seeing the similarity, economic disparities often link us together with the racial and gender biases, and building those solidarities allows these movements to unite their efforts against a common and oppressive system, creating a stronger forefront for systemic change. Coalition building is another point. You may find groups where you come together for a shared common goal, and then you may break apart later on for other things. And I think that's important to have that flexibility. where, you know, if there is a common ground, building that coalition across the Indigenous, Black, Palestinian, and even if, you know, some communities in the Black communities don't see everything eye to eye, which is fine, but when there's a time where we do see eye to eye, there is that importance, that quickness, that swiftness to get together and coalition to fight against powers that be. You know, enduring with our organizing, with our coalition building, with our solidarity building, there is a level of cultural exchange. So we see that very vibrant in our rallies and our protests. Having the Indigenous groups lead those protests is something that has been, you know, given with the, you know, having the consent from the Indigenous community to have them lead, to be part of that leadership, is something within my generation that is very, you know, beautiful to see. And having that empathy, I think, you know, with our society has been so individualized, and the way we break through that is through empathy, and love and joy. So seeing that our organizing, our solidarity has to be rooted in that, has to be rooted in empathy, has to be rooted in joy and love, because that's the way we build a better future. It builds a better future, and it strengthens those community ties within the communities. That creates, you know, a strong support network where we can mobilize quickly. I know there is a difference between mobilization and organization. So we have mastered the mobilization of our needs and our shared goals. We show up every weekend, every other day, in these rallies and these protests for Black lives, for Palestinian freedoms, for Indigenous land back. And in doing that, it does, it is shaking. The status quo is scared. So, you know, if you don't think things are changing, trust me, things are changing on the ground. And it's starting with our elders and our younger generation coming together and dismantling it piece by piece. On a global perspective, it's understanding that, you know, again, borders are a colonial tool, that are lines done on a map about 150 years ago or less. So understanding that these lines, these borders aren't true to our calling, and that is, you know, another form of that land back, is getting rid of those borders. You don't want to microscopic the land back as a Canadian issue. It's not. It's a global call for dismantling and amplifying that Indigenous leadership from those lands. Yeah, so again, it's quite important that, you know, with my organizing and my experience with Halton Black Voices, we come together when we need to, and we support each other in other spaces when we need to. Given that the work that we do is very heavy, we also like to make sure that, you know, we have those joys. So although although we work together closely with Indigenous groups and Palestinian groups, you know, I also have experience of pure joy with those groups too. And that is equally, I stress, that is like equally as important as like organizing, mobilizing with these folks, is also creating that community through love and joy and empathy.
Thank you so much, Gennile. I was again furiously writing and really appreciate even the note that you finished on, that reminder of Joy's role in the work of justice. And I've been thinking about it, you know, since the top of this conversation, Patty, when you even just shared that you created the skirt. I could also feel the vibe of joy in talking about that. So thank you all for those, your presentations, and just giving some context to our space here, so we can understand if some of these struggles are new for us. And so I'm going to take a moment to see if I can figure out how to add all of the speakers here to the spotlight. And then what I'd like to do is transition to just asking a couple of questions, and then we will hold some space, about 15 minutes for, so I probably can get through 2 or 3 questions. I'll make sure I give everybody at least one good question, because I think I dreamed up many more than that, but I'll pick 3, and then I want to give the audience space. So if you have a question, please feel free to flow it into chat. And I don't know if you're getting questions directly, but I would welcome you getting those ready too, so that we can make the most of our time. And so maybe the first question that I will ask is really, and I'll put this question to perhaps Gennile and Shania as kind of the starting point. The first question that I had is, how can we center the voices and experiences of marginalized communities in conversations about land back and liberation? And so, Gennile, I know you said in your talk about the importance of that cross-generational, intergenerational solidarity and coming together, but I wonder if both of, maybe Shania, do you want to go first, and then I'll ask Gennile? Just kind of speak to the question of how can we center the voices and experiences of marginalized communities in conversations about land back and liberation. I'll put that in the chat.
Okay, do you want me to go first?
Sure, yes, please. And just give Gennile a moment to collect.
Like that's what, like, thank you so much again for this fascinating panel, and I'm so, again feel honored and humbled by the whole experience of sharing the platform with you all. And like, how the marginalized communities like, Dalits or Adivasis in India, or who are indigenous people, and how we can, relate their oppression and their predicament with the question of land back. In fact, even in post-colonial India, the central aspect of state operation, even now, right now when I'm speaking, one of the important way in which the nation state organizes in India, or for that matter in most of the countries, even post-colonial nation states, is that, reclaiming the basically dispossessing the lands of indigenous people, because those are the lands in which the resources they want to sell it to the global capitalist industries are available. Like in central India, for example, iron ore, bauxite, like all these very important minerals which have global value, all these multinational companies and mining corporations are actively involved. The Indian state actively, uses police and military to displace forcibly the indigenous communities. And same thing with what happens is that, the very idea of caste is that, denial of land ownership is very critical to the, oppression of Dalit communities. That's how what happens is that, the way the poverty and dehumanization and caste marginalization work together. So in this context, at one level, we see that, land is not connected. It is centrality of ownership of land, which is very critical both to the state and also the dominant caste or dominant groups. So in this context, it's very important, like, as Patty said, it's the decolonized world is not about ownership, different forms of land ownership. In fact, freeing the land from the ownership of people. In fact, giving land to itself, and then, having the relationship with the land is very, very critical. So in this context, what happens is that, like different regimes in history, like in the context, as an historian, I can tell, in the context of South Asia, is that in different regimes in history, what they did is that, they tried to claim ownership in different ways. But in that ownership claiming, one of the important things they try to do is that, they dispossess indigenous communities and people actually who are connected to the land, who have relationship to the land. It is re-establishing that relationship is very critical to the idea of having this new forms of relationships and new forms of decolonized and de-Brahmanized world at, this stage.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Gennile, maybe I'll invite you to respond to that question.
Yes, thank you, Lena. I said it earlier, it's really important to amplify Indigenous leadership and voices through every step of the way. So making sure that we prioritize their leadership in the actions and the conversations, making them the decision makers, and supporting their initiatives, and to respect their autonomy in directing the course of the movement is key. And the education part, so to educate on historical and ongoing injustice, I think that's something that TikTok is doing really well, and that's why you can see like why they're trying to ban TikTok, because you can see people on the ground educating folks, and it is being far-reaching. which is shaking the status quo. So it's great when you creating those sort of outlets for people to continuously learning and to make that learning very accessible. I think is part of the way we can center those voices of those people that are under resourced or not being served equitably. And it's also, to be creating those inclusive spaces, whether it's online or offline, or in your community. It's important that those spaces that you create are inclusive, and they're well-established forums where communities can speak about their experiences firsthand, and you are able to highlight or spotlight those voices that need to be amplified based off those struggles and those common goals. Another way to support those and to support the voices is through economic and political empowerment, which, the left is kind of struggling to do in Canada, is trying to get organized politically. You see it really young with other groups, but getting folks organized early provides everyone that's tools sooner to feel empowered to address power and to help to hold those with account. And something that everyone has said continuously is, practicing that active listening and the response to that listening. I know it's good to listen and to gain that knowledge, but you have to take that next step and do something with what you've heard. In order to be like a true, authentic ally, is to take those stories and to ensure that the history doesn't repeat itself, because we're hearing all the stories and we can't let it repeat itself. So it's just to ensure that you are actively listening, but then it's also leading to a response as a person. And then the last point for me is really fostering true partnerships along these movements. So building the alliances with other social justice movements that will create a stronger, more stronger and powerful base for advocacy and change. Yeah, so it is important to when you're trying to amplify those voices, make sure that they are part of the program that you're trying to run.
Appreciate that reminder of being in a relationship with the community, so you can know, right, that whose voice is to amplify. So I appreciate that. Okay, so the next question I want to move to, and I will keep dancing through my questions unless I get some audience questions, but I'm just going to share the next question, and maybe I'll invite Patty first to respond to it, and then I'll invite Chantelle. And so the question that I want to invite is, what are some tangible actions that you've done or seen done in your communities that in response to the needs that are urgent and that have been effective? And again, however you define effective, I'd love to hear that too. So, and Patty, if you're like, I want to answer a different question, you can also do that. But that was what was moving through me.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and this is really such an important question because, like with the quote that I started off with, we often get asked, well, what should we do? And what about us? And what about my house? And what does land back mean for me? And so to think about, what things have we seen being done? What's helping? What's working? And I think I've got two really good examples of things that have happened in Niagara. So the first example would be, so the Strongwater Singers is a local hand drum group, which I belonged to for about 8 years. I just don't have the capacity right now, to be involved, with them right now. But yeah, I mean, I have a long history with that group. And because it's reconciliation time in Canada, the group is being asked to sing basically everywhere. And money comes with those requests. And so what the Strongwater Singers do is they take that money and then it gets redistributed within the community. So it doesn't get divided up amongst the drummers who show up. It gets redistributed among community members. You know, we helped some, you know, an elder get some water. You know, he didn't have, you know, his cistern had broken many years ago, and he'd live in, I think, 2 or 3 decades without clean water in his home. So he needed his cistern repaired because he lives out in the country, you know, helping people with rent and gas money and groceries, and just kind of really meeting people's material needs while, you know, performing. And the performances also come with challenges because they're always invited to, you know, to introduce themselves. And so it's not just enough to redistribute finances, you know, to redistribute resources. You also have to push back at the systems that caused that need in the first place. And so that's something that this drum group is very good at doing, is, you know, redistributing the resources that flow through them, as well as challenging, you know, some of these, you know, systems of harm that's where I got my start with public speaking, you know, was by having that platform with that drum group. So that's something that has worked really well, you know, within that community. But then the other thing, which is kind of where I'm putting a lot of my energy in right now, is with the organizing around Palestine, because, and this is where I'm going to jump in with the joy that Gennile has said that we really need in our movements. And I'm just going to mention Adrienne Marie Brown and a lot of the writing that she has done around transformative joy in movements. We really do need more joy in our movements. Sometimes I understand why people don't want to join us, because we're just so angry all the time. Even though there's good reasons to be angry, there are very good reasons for joy. And I mean, you can see a little bit of the henna on my hand still from an Eid celebration that we were invited to. So one of the things that we're working on is just building those relationships between the Black, Indigenous, and Palestinian Muslim communities, Muslim and Palestinian, because that's not, those are not distinct groups. They can sometimes be different, as Chantelle has reminded us. You know, so we're not monoliths, not any of us. There's a lot of overlap in our communities as well. You know, so just taking time for ourselves to be together, not, you know, to rally or work, just to get to know each other and enjoy each other's company. And one of the things that this started with the drum group, to, you know, we didn't know what else to do when, you know, when this most recent round of violence started. And so we just offered them companionship, to just come to our circle and let us share our medicine with you, and let's sing and drum with you. And then that has taken into other groups, and different people in our communities are organizing it. So it's not even the same bunch of organizers doing it every time. It's different groups, and it's different groups. And the next one is going to be hosted by an art center. And I've been told that it's going to be the gayest celebration ever, and I am here for that. So it's, you know, queer Muslims and, you know, queer settlers and queer Indigenous people putting together a celebration of just, and it really is just getting to know each other. And so those are two things that are happening, you know, locally in our community that that I'm just really pleased to have been part of in some way, because yeah, I mean, our movements need more joy, and we need to be friends. Right? We can appreciate that our struggles are materially connected. You know, we can appreciate that our liberation is connected. We can appreciate the reality that colonization dispossesses us and separates us from land. But we really do need to be friends, because friends show up for each other. Friends will go to the wall for each other. And so that's what this, you know, that's what this little bit of organizing is really focusing on, is just building those relationships. And yeah, when the gayest celebration is scheduled, I will let y'all know if you want to make a road trip down for it.
I'm down, so please let me know. And before I hand over the mic to Chantelle, I just really want to really acknowledge what you shared in your response, and that, you know, to honor the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, that idea that no one is special and everyone is needed. That, like, that's what I'm hearing. And that if some of us think that, oh, I can't do this work, it's too hard, we all know how to be a friend. We all know the experience of like being nurtured and cared for by good friends when we're in a place of struggle. So I just really appreciate those messages, and very accessible, and the examples that you provided. Chantelle, if I could invite you to come forward and respond.
Sure, thank you. To echo what Patty was saying and what Gennile was saying about joy, I'm just reminded, whenever we see videos of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, and whenever something positive happens, the amount of joy and celebration that even in a time of genocide, they are able to come together and dance or do something to make the kids laugh. Like, there really is such resilience in that ability to come together as family and to still find happiness in the bare minimum. And I think that that is so crucial. I would like to say that and I wouldn't even say that it's primarily for the Palestinian struggle. Again, they are all connected, as Angela Davis says, that nothing happens in isolation, right? So something that we within our community have been finding very, very effective is the BDS movement. So boycotting. And this isn't just boycotting Israeli products, but we're also looking, as Chennai was saying, sweatshops and companies that are exploiting workers or destroying the environment. And in this, we can celebrate the local business owners and the small business owners and make friends and make that community so that we can all support each other in order to take back the power, at least economically. So boycotts have been so fundamental across the board. We saw what happened within South Africa in tearing down the apartheid there, that the global boycotts of South Africa were really a huge piece in what brought that down. So the second part is the divestments. I have been given a new energy seeing these students and their encampments. Like, my shivers just every time I see a new school sign on. So supporting these students in their encampments and writing and calling, and there's call outs for supplies and things that are needed in order to support them, because this is big. This is very big, what's happening across America. And now it's even starting in Canada. I cannot wait for the first one here in New Brunswick. I think it's in the works. So then what they are doing these encampments for is to divest their tuition funding from going to support Israel. So we are really looking for leaders and community members to support these actions and to demand these divestments from these larger corporations. And then, of course, the sanctions. This is really big on each individual. And again, it is not simply for the Palestinian struggle. If you are living in a place where you are privileged enough to have access to a government representative, they should know you by name. They should know you, and you should be able to call them, email them as much as you can. Even if it's not your government representatives, your school board representatives. There are so many institutions that are still living in such colonial mindsets and that are educating future generations and are paving the way for the infrastructure in our own communities. So you have a voice, and we are asking, every member in our community across the board is asking for your voice to be amplified to your government officials, to these institutions, to the banks. If you still have an account with CIBC and Scotiabank and RBC across the board, not only are they funding destruction here in Canada, but they're also funding surveillance in Palestine. So, it's all connected, and your voice really matters in saying, I don't agree with this. There needs to be an alternative, or we take our business elsewhere. So if you need more information on BDS, there's lots of different organizations that are promoting which companies to boycott, which sanctions to support, either the BDS Coalition, BDS Canada. It's quite accessible. So I think that would be the big thing. And then coming back to being friends, a lot of the Palestinian organizations, at least now, are really emphasizing sharing our culture and our heritage so that we can be humans. We just want to be humans like the rest of y'all. We have traditions, we have cultures, we have music and food and all of these things that were taken from us. And now we want to celebrate it. So I really do feel in coming together with your community and honoring where each of us comes from and sharing food with your neighbors is probably the most powerful thing we can do right now. So I think that was a lot of actions on my on my end. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Chantelle. Again, you gave some really concrete. I tried to plug in some of the websites in the back end while you were talking. So if you look at them, you're like, no, I have one that's better. Go ahead and plug it in. But just that reminder of again, like coming back to relationship to what we consume, what we choose to consume, and coming back to the land, we're talking about land back, and can we all think about our relationship and really feel our rootedness? Because I think we dissociate a lot too, right? Because of I'm mindful of how numb how many of us are in a time like this, and how do we stay connected to our hope, to our sense of hope. And if we need to put it down for a moment because we're exhausted, we need to do that. But how do we pick it up again, right? And that's where I think I've been served by community, and really appreciate Muskan, the quote that rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation, and healing is an act of communion. So just all the benefits there. And I'm going to pause for my questions because I did receive a question from the audience, and maybe I'll put it to the panel, and maybe, it's going to be a moment of who is going to answer it. But with the TikTok ban, how can we as a multiracial community continue to organize and share information without the filtering from social media? And so thank you, Anna, for getting that question to me. I'll put it in the chat as well. So anyone have a burning urge of I know how, and then raise your hand, or Chantelle, go for it.
Get off the social media. A lot of Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, all of these are basically owned by the people who want to shut us down. There are so many alternative chat channels. Signal on Telegram, you are able to follow different news channels, different organizing channels. There is a big worry about the social media and the information that obviously we know, like we all know that it's tracking us so heavily. So I would stick to more alternative communication groups like Signal and Telegram. Telegram specifically because there are lots of news channels that you can follow that is uncensored, and lots of organizing groups across Canada in order to get involved with your local communities.
Thank you for those two quick, accessible, and if people want to share, because I was looking for Telegram too, that's new for me. So if someone knows how to give the source to it, please do in the chat. We'll share all these links along with a link to the recording and the follow-up. Is there anyone else from the panel who wants to offer anything from to support that question before I come to another one? We're good. I want to use our time. So, okay, I have another question. And so, okay, looking at, okay, and maybe I might even open this. This might be the last one, and I'm gonna maybe invite everyone to take, a minute and a half to respond, because I think it's really important. And some of you have maybe hinted to this in your presentations, but how do cultural practices and traditions within your specific community contribute to the resistance, the resilience, the healing in the face of colonization and oppression? And so, Janaya, I might invite you to go first, then Gennile, then Patty, and then Chantelle. So I'll hopefully remember that order.
Yes, thank you so much. And one of the important cultural practices which actually continues the tradition, and also tradition of resistance, and also it has a global resonance in the context of what we are doing today, is drumming. Like, for example, Patty was talking about it, like, I drum a lot. Traditionally my community are drummers. Like, in fact, I think I have my somewhere, like, Lena was there when we celebrated Dalit History Month. We started with the drumming, I drummed. So like drumming, like this is what, like, our practice is one of the important things, like the very idea of origin of civilization is attached to this idea of drumming, like, the way you drum, the sound as an important beginning of humanity. And sound also used as a very important way to awaken people and also to celebrate the human life. And also, so in this context, like for example, drumming is very critical to the idea of Dalit resistance. So therefore, it becomes very important symbol, like the way in which indigenous people here, relate. Like I remember going to first time, when after I moved to Canada, I went to indigenous event and I was shocked to see the drum. Like, like then I said, I can drum. They were very shocked that I can drum. So the drumming is a very important part of our cultural resistance and also our identity.
Thank you, Dr. Jungam. Right.
Yeah, so drumming's a great one, and then singing. I think, culturally we with the drums always comes the tune. So I know culturally we can get together and sing, and you can almost see that. You can see, what's the word? So you can catch the vibe across the culture when you sing, right? So even you don't have to have like the high tech stuff, just a couple drums, a couple rattles, and then like you're good to go, right? You can feel the ancestors come through your voice as you sing. So collective singing is a great way to contribute to the resistance, and we see that in the protests. We see that in our own homes sometimes. So it's yeah, singing for sure.
Thank you, Gennile. Go ahead, Patty.
Yes, drumming, yes, singing, yes, dancing. I mean, those are also very key features of, Indigenous to here communities. And it really shouldn't be a surprise that people who live in close relationship with the land would find similar ways of being. And yeah, low tech, right? It's a hand drum. It's a song. So many of our songs are vocables. You don't even have to know the words. Just catch on the melody and it's pretty quick. So there were a few things that I was thinking very quickly. We've got round dance, and at this Eid celebration, which was such a beautiful reminder of Palestinian joy. We're getting such a terrible two-dimensional picture of Palestinians right now. To be at this gathering of Palestinian joy was just really beautiful. And they tried so hard to teach us the dabka. It's counting to 2 is harder than you might think. But what it gave me the idea for, because where our communities, kind of the cultural aspect of Indigenous to here communities is, I'm thinking about friendship centers and powwows, where we have these kinds of celebrations, but you can make you make a donation and you kind of purchase a special, right? It's kind of a way of fundraising, for these events because they cost money. And so what made me think of for this powwow that's coming up in October is that we would fundraise a special to bring in Palestinian drummers for a dabke at our powwow, to bring them in and just put them right in the center of Palestinian joy, right in the center of our powwow. And so I thought that was, so that's something that we're going to work towards in October, but also what has become a feature of Indigenous to here cultural activity is the Sisters in Spirit and, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls vigils that happen, kind of throughout the year. And there's one happening on Sunday, May 5th. That's Red Dress Day. And a friend of mine organizes that. And as soon as I saw the poster, I messaged her and said, hey, do you have room for Palestinian voice? Because missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, two-spirited people, is a global phenomenon, right? I've actually put together a panel for a conference in Norway where we're going to be talking about it that way. And so, yes, she did have space for one more speaker. And so I quickly messaged my friend and she's going to find, make sure that there's a Palestinian woman present who can speak to that on those steps. And, so I think it's important as we have our cultural spaces that we open them up, because what I'm hearing is a lot of similar cultural language that we may not sing the same songs, but we're still singing and we can sing together. And I think that's really important in building these, building these relationships and having that common ground between us.
Love that, Patty. Thank you so much there, Chantelle. And I have a feeling Dr. Jungam's going to be willing to drum us out as we close. Am I wrong in assuming that? Give me a thumbs up if you're good with that. Make sure you unmute yourself. Yeah.
I wanted to show the drum to you all.
Oh, okay. I was going to be like shamelessly asking you to drum, but let's hear Chantelle's response. And then if you will feel like doing some beats, I will give you the floor. But go ahead, Chantelle.
I don't think there's really too much to add. Everyone has said basically, when I think of being Palestinian and I think of our gatherings, or I think of when I see, you know, people struggling, I often see this other side of them also dancing and drumming. And I think what also comes to mind is creating. So arts, and you know, we have our embroidery and we have so many symbols that we've been using over the years to show our resistance and to make it through really tough political situations. And it's really defined our history in that. So just creating in general is that outlet, and is that way that we are able to honor our traditions, honor our culture, but also release what we need to release, because there is a lot of ancestral anger. And like, I know now I'm a mother and I feel almost like I've earned that angry Arab woman title now. Like, I feel like that's where it comes from. But it is because there's just so much ancestral rage, especially for the feminine across the board. So we do really need to work towards releasing it in creative ways and having those outlets. So dancing and music and art and food, all the food are really what needs to happen in order to keep us going. We know that liberation is messy work, and right now everyone is all hands on deck. So I think there's also a lot of need for remembering that it comes in waves, and because there are so many of us right now, it allows us to step back, take a breath while someone else speaks. So really being able to honor that flow and those waves, and being able to tap out so that you can come back in even stronger, because we're in it for the long haul right now. Like, this is just the beginning of this collective liberation. So pace yourselves and take care of yourselves and take care of one another and find joy, as everyone has been mentioning. You're reminding me more than anything to find more joy day to day. So
Thank you. What a powerful note to be finishing on. And just two pieces I'm taking away is that we are more than the sum of our trauma, the systems that are trying to destroy us. And that's, to me, what joy really is, that reminder and that opportunity to co-create. I am a huge fan of fusion. Imagine we had like a mashup of all of the food, just of the communities being represented today. That'd be so delish. I really want to thank all of you, Gennile, Dr. Jungam, Patty, Chantelle. Thank you so much for saying yes to this conversation. Anna, thank you for your work in the back end to make this happen, all the magic you worked. And of course, thanking all of the participants for taking time out of your day to be a part of this conversation. I don't know, Dr. Jungam, if you would be willing to do a couple of beats as we close up, but just stay tuned for the follow-up. But yes, thank you.
Stand up and do.
Thank you. Yes, take care of yourselves. Oh, I can't hear. Let me change. Let's see if I can share sound better. Is that better? Are we hearing it? I don't know why we're not hearing it.
it looks awesome.
Yeah, thank you. You know what? I will find a video of you playing if we have one. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all. Take care of yourselves. And we'll hopefully connect again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rena.
Take care. Take care. You're welcome.
Well, thank you so much. This was really enjoyable, especially learning and listening, learning from and listening to my co-panelists. It was a really good day.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. And more power to you all.
Yes, and Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
Thank you.